Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Stability Cyber and Every Fibre event. We're just going to give it maybe 2 minutes just to allow any other attendees to join, and just to know that this session is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, you can log off at this point. Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready to start. So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Stability Cyber and Every Fibre event. We're going to do a live demonstration today of some cyber attacks. We're going to retrieve some information. But first, I just want to give you a little bit of information about Stability. So Stability is a managed IT service business. We manage all size companies from 5 to 10 employees right up to multinationals. And we also work with companies in all different areas. So it doesn't really matter what area you're in, Stability can actually help you manage your business. So why are we here today? Ransomware is the fastest growing industry in the world. We're finding more and more attacks are happening each and every week. And if you calculate the money that it's generating, it's about 1.5 trillion a year, which gives it around the 11th highest GDP in the world, which gives it the same GDP as somewhere like Canada or Russia. Now, when you take into consideration that only 1 in 4 cyber attacks are actually reported, this number of 1.5 trillion could actually be an awful lot higher. Obviously, with that amount of money involved, there's really no sign of these types of cyber attacks stopping. Sorry. 66% of SMEs will be forced to shut down for at least a day, and some of them for good. And most companies don't even rate their ability to actually deal with a cyber attack. So with that in mind, I want to introduce Phil, who's one of our partners from Datto. Good afternoon, Phil. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon, John. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. I'm just going to pass over to yourself.
Thanks so much. So if I start showing my screen, thanks so much for the introduction, John. Just to introduce myself briefly, I'm Phil McGowan. I'm a sales engineer at a company called Datto, and Datto are a technology partner of Stability. So Datto itself is quite a large organization. So we've got over 47 global locations, over 14,000 partners like Stability, and we're in lots of different countries, including Ireland and right the way across Europe. And we're actually offering our technology to over 500,000 small and medium-sized businesses. And with that, we're supported by over 1,500 employees. So we're really an extension of Stability's team when it comes to our technology being deployed to specific businesses. What we can go through today is really business continuity, the core of what Datto has always offered via partners such as Stability, would be protecting business data, critical business data, and kind of hedging against the threats such as ransomware or anything that might cause downtime. So as we think about what is causing downtime today. People normally think that backups are used for protecting against natural disasters such as fires, such as floods, or even tornadoes. We're actually an American technology vendor in terms of where we've come from. So very much was these types of threats that we were traditionally protecting against. But very much the landscape has changed over time, and John did a great introduction kind of explaining why that's the case, just with how effective ransomware is as a revenue stream for criminals. Essentially, that's what it boils down to. And that's why people are really your greatest risk these days. The greatest risk to your data is not really what's happening in the floodplain, but the actual people inside your building or outside your building who might want to hurt you. So this guy he's really in the unfortunate role today of being the face of human error. He was the face of human error in a couple of ways, because this guy was responsible for the Hawaii disaster alerting system. So he actually accidentally broadcast an alert saying that they were under nuclear attack in Hawaii. So this went to everybody's phones. It went to all the TV stations, the radio stations, saying this is not a drill, you're actually under attack, seek shelter. But that was a mistake. Mistakes do happen, it's just human nature. And this guy's profile picture on LinkedIn actually has his password. So that's another mistake there, which can be very costly to an organization. If you're reliant on passwords, then there's always going to be some vulnerability to those passwords being exposed, going into the wild, and with that, anybody having access to your data. So let's think about another human actor here. Kind of historically, hackers were people working out of their parents' basements or just in a dark room, doing it for kudos, trying to stick it to the man and actually show off that they could compromise systems. Relatively innocent compared to what we have today, which is organized criminal organizations setting up shop to actually go out and attack people's data and generate an income stream off the back of that criminal activity. It's proven so lucrative that they are able to actually have a proper, almost business-like infrastructure in place to go out and attack data all over the world. A lot of that is facilitated by the dark web. So I put a couple of slides in here on the dark web and just how that's accessed. I mean, 96% of traffic is not searchable by search engines. What we're used to seeing as search results for Google, for example, a lot of that traffic on the web cannot actually be accessed without something called the onion router or another special bit of software, a special browser that allows you to access the dark web. Traffic is directed through a network of intermediaries. So this would be layers, almost like layers of an onion, hence the name Tor, the onion router. And with that, you can access all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So the Silk Road is a very famous example of a dark web marketplace. Think of it as Amazon for the dark web. You can see by the categories on the left-hand side that drugs are definitely a big thing. It's like an entire category in itself with lots of different drugs that you could purchase on the dark web there. But it's also used for purchasing strains of the type of ransomware I'm going to demonstrate live today. So CryptoLocker or other types of ransomware can be procured very easily on the dark web. This would be another dark web marketplace. It's the same sort of thing, counterfeit goods, but also services. So you could actually make contact with somebody, a hacker, who would then design an attack for you. If you wanted to target a particular organization, you wouldn't necessarily need the skills yourself. You could actually just subcontract out the criminal hacking activity. So therefore, when we look at what actually causes downtime, whereas most businesses do have plans to recover from natural disasters, floods, fires, power cuts, these types of things, they actually only account for a small percentage of the actual causes of downtime. So ransomware and malware, what we're particularly focusing on today, is a cause of downtime in 23% of cases. That's what we found by surveying our partners, and human error would be another 25%. And this portion of downtime being caused by ransomware and malware is only on the increase. It really is running rampant. We've seen this in the news, and it's an absolute epidemic. So the total ransom paid by small and medium-sized businesses in 2018 was over 500 million euros. And if you look at this slide here, you can see the proliferation of ransomware. It really skyrocketed around the time of CryptoLocker first coming out, which was in 2013. It was that effective at locking up people's computers and therefore prompting them to pay a ransom that we've just since then seen so many different strains be developed that will encrypt files on a machine. And there are even some quite creative strains of ransomware. So there's this strain of ransomware called Popcorn Time, which is reported on this news site, and it's evil genius, as the article says. Was what it seeks to do is turn the actual victims of ransomware into criminals themselves by giving them essentially a choice. They can either pay the ransom and try to decrypt their files that way, or they can actually spread the ransomware payload to two other people, and then with that they will have their files decrypted. So it's almost like chain mail for ransomware. If you're happy to spread the virus to other people, then they will be happy to actually decrypt your files for you. So this really attacks other people's computers. And it was so popular that we've even got a translation service here. So you'll be able to actually offer this all over the world. Anybody that's connected to the internet would be a possible target for this type of ransomware attack. Another strain of ransomware that's fairly creative in the way it goes to market, if you like, would be what's called the Fat Boy ransomware strain, where it actually tethers the ransom demand to the price of a Big Mac in that area. That price really does scale up and down dependent on the affluence of the area. So you don't want to be asking for a ransom that's perhaps too low for an affluent area that might leave money on the table, but at the same time you don't want to have sky high demand. So if you're trying to increase the chance that somebody will pay the ransom once you've encrypted their files, then you really want to be kind of intelligent about the ransom you're asking, and this is a system to do that for you automatically. It would just adjust the ransom based on where you live. So this ransomware as a service idea has even emerged, and you see certain forums, again, on the dark web, where you're able to really tailor the service that you're offering. Even customer support offered for that over Jabber. So it's quite an eye-opener to people sometimes to just sort of see the other side, the darker side of the web, and what it can be used for in first procuring strains of malware and then spreading those to unwitting victims. There has been a move, however, in recent years from on-premise data, so servers deployed perhaps in your office building or in a physical on-premise location, to more and more cloud services being used by businesses. So G Suite and Office 365 would be good examples of that, very popular amongst businesses these days. But SaaS data is still vulnerable to exactly the same type of ransomware attack that we're going to show today. In fact, there's a strain of ransomware called Ransom Cloud, which we've got some good videos for on our website, and then Stability will be able to share those out as well. So this is how hackers can infect Office 365 with ransomware. They receive an email. It purports to be from Microsoft, and Microsoft is recommending a spam filtering tool. And if you just click onto the link, then it will ask for permissions associated with your Office 365 account. And if you're happy to grant those permissions, what it can do is actually generate an OAuth2 token. It can then do anything it wants according to those permissions within the domain, and that could include infecting all of your emails. So to be any users within your organization who have your email address domain, their emails will be encrypted with this type of attack. And then, of course, the hackers will send another email just to demand a ransom. So you may think you're already covered if you have a great backup solution in place. You may think you're covered if your data's already in the cloud, but it's definitely not the case. We've seen lots of organizations get hit even when they have backup. It takes them a long time to recover. So this happened earlier in the year. You can see it was in January the 3rd, 2019, that the story was reported by the Irish Times that Luas had been attacked and over 3,000 user records were compromised. Not only that, but it shut down the website, so that the tram services website was down for a month in the end. That's how long it took them to recover with just backup in place and no real business continuity plan behind it. And also, the FAI was hit in a similar ransomware attack. It was targeted by hackers, and their files were encrypted as well. So impact really across the globe. You can pick out stories from wherever. Data as an organization does presentations all over the world, and there are so many examples of companies big and small being hit in this way. So that's the reason that Stability partners with Datto to provide business continuity, because backup really isn't enough. Business continuity is what you want to move towards. So let's have a look at the difference between those two things, backup compared with business continuity. Well, all backup really does is it minimizes data loss. It just says, right, I've got a copy of my data, so if I lose my live production system, I can recover from that copy. What business continuity does is it minimizes downtime. So it's not only a copy of the data, but it's the solution in place to take that copy of the data and very quickly turn it into a virtualized copy, whatever is required to actually keep the business up and running in the face of disasters. So this kind of business continuity solution is really built around a couple of central kind of theories of how best to protect data. And one of those would be the rule of three. So you should always keep your data in at least 3 places. So you'd have the live production system itself, you then have an on-site backup of that system, and then a copy of that data off-site. So with the on-site backup, you can very quickly recover, and I can demonstrate that today. With the off-site copy, you have redundancy. So if you ever lose the copy on-site, you have the data safely replicated elsewhere. So we call this reliable data redundancy to kind of see it in a flow chart format. You'll see there's a continuity device in the center of the diagram. This could be a virtual machine that's deployed. It could be a physical machine. In either case, it's going to be capturing backups of your servers, whether they're physical servers or virtual machines. They will be backed up to that continuity device on premise, and that is your on-site backup that you maintain. There is replication from there to an off-site cloud, and then possibly as well, you could have geo-redundancy of data replicated to a second off-site cloud. So as an organization and partnering with Stability, we often think about how best to demonstrate continuity. Well, we're going to demonstrate continuity today by doing a ransomware attack. But we have other ways to do it. At events, we sometimes go through what we call a disaster demo. So this is often setting things on fire, putting things in liquid nitrogen, and then recovering the data. This is where we went through this exact process of setting things on fire in a Marriott hotel in Sydney. I think one of Datto's first forays into Australia. This is what happened, which was pretty impressive for the audience, but unfortunately it also set off the sprinklers in the building, and the full to capacity Marriott hotel had to be evacuated, and a fire truck was rolled, which was very expensive for Datto as an organization to have to pay the fines associated with that. So as we start to look at Disaster Demo 2.0, it's very much a case of demonstrating how malware can take out a system, CryptoLocker specifically in the case we're going to go through today, and how you can then recover from that attack very swiftly if you have a Datto solution in place. So let me show you just a normal Windows Server 2012 R2 virtual machine. And what I've got in here is just some ordinary files, including in the downloads. I've got these 3 files here. Now what I'm going to do is actually launch a ransomware attack by just clicking on one of these files, because they look to be normal spreadsheet, PDF, and Word documents. They're actually not. if I change the view slightly from medium icons to perhaps details, I can see these are applications. These are actually executables that can run. So they're actually just spoofed to look like Word documents and Excel spreadsheets. That's just a way to get the payload into your system. So prompting an end user to download a file and perhaps try to run it. They're actually going to be launching CryptoLocker on their system. So in a moment, what I'm going to do is completely infect all the files on this Windows Server 2012 R2 virtual machine. But just before I do that, let's go through a process of really proving that this is the actual system we're going to recover later on. So if I put a timestamp in here, we put the time and date, and if I just put the location that I'm in today, so Reading, and save this as a file on the desktop. This is an easy location. I'll call this Reading attack. As I've saved that onto the desktop, that time and date stamp is going to be important later on when we demonstrate the speed of recovery, this 1422 timestamp. What I can now do is just back up the system. Just so it's got that latest bit of data change. So it's just to show we're not going for any smoke and mirrors here. I've got this TJ crypto machine, Windows Server 2012 R2, and I can just start a backup of it. And this is just going to capture an entire image of the system, in fact, but it will include that tiny notepad file which I created just now. This is now running through a backup. This is just the C volume that's being protected. If you have multiple volumes on your server, we can protect that as well. We can protect a D and an E drive. All of the critical data should be backed up, and that allows us to very quickly get you back up and running. See the backup logs as it runs through. It's just doing some post-processing jobs and any retention that's required. And there we go. We've got that fresh backup from 2:23 p.m. today. So if I jump back onto the actual system itself, what I can now do is launch the ransomware attack. So if I double click on this spreadsheet, what will happen is it firstly starts behaving quite strangely. It disappears. Actually, all of the files are now being encrypted in the background. I say all of the files. It actually wouldn't be the files that the computer needs to boot. Those will be left unaffected. So the computer will still boot, and it will also display a ransom in just a moment. But all of the application data will be completely encrypted. So all the files that the business would need to run, those are pretty much scrambled. So if I just take the example of that notepad file that I created, and I go to open it up now, it doesn't even know which application to use to open the file. I can tell it to try and use Notepad. But there you go, the actual data is unrecognizable. And it explains why that's the case. The files have been encrypted. The strength of the encryption with RSA 2048-bit key, that's not something that you're going to be able to break. You can have a supercomputer at your disposal that's going to take you quadrillions of years to actually run through all the possible permutations for that key. So you really have two options at this point. You can either pay the ransom, you can try your luck with that, and it even gives you instructions for some of the things I was talking about at the start around the Onion router and downloading that, accessing the dark web, and facilitating a Bitcoin payment to a Bitcoin address that they specify here. That would be your method of paying the ransom, and then you just hope that your files will then be decrypted by the criminals. You can go through that process. It's not recommended. Our statistics show that only 15 to 20% of the time will you actually get your data back if you go down that route, and you may have still left a backdoor to your system, even if your files have been decrypted. So it's best to, at this point, revert to your backups. So you'll want your most recent backup available to recover from. So if I jump back onto my data device, see from the Protect tab, I launched the backup at 2:23 p.m. Let's see how I can recover with that backup and really move into business continuity. If I jump on to restore this time, and if I choose the actual crypto machine, I can then choose local virtualization as a recovery type. And this is my 2:23 p.m. backup. That's what I want to restore. I could restore earlier backups, so this contains the most recent copy of the data, including that notepad file that we created. So if I go to start a restore with this, what it will do is show me a wizard next where I can see a pool of available resources on my data in terms of RAM and CPU cores, and I can assign some of these out to the local virtualization I'm about to create. So I can choose a number of cores, an amount of RAM, and if I'm happy with that, that it's going to be able to run with those resources, I can hit Start VM. And this is the speed of recovery that it's really crucial to demonstrate. This is the service that Stability is looking to provide with data as the underpinning technology. What I get is a thumbnail screenshot as I go through the boot process. It will continuously update through the boot process, but I can actually click on the thumbnail screenshot or the open in browser link, and it will then open up a new tab in my browser. Just a VNC connection that's been opened. And I often say to people who are looking at this technology, however long their server normally takes to boot, it can take a similar amount of time on the data device. It does go through a couple of extra bits and pieces from a technical standpoint, so it will inject new drivers at the point of restore. That's purely so you can be restored to dissimilar hardware. We can restore you to a data device running the data cloud, or perhaps image your backup onto completely different specification physical hardware or into a virtual environment. So as I've gone through that boot process, I'm able to send a Control-Alt-Delete, enter in my password. Now that server that I encrypted with ransomware has been recovered on the data device, and it was that server, as we can see, by the file I created with that 1422 timestamp, and it's now 1428. So just 6 minutes from the point of attacking the server, taking it offline, to actually then recovering the data. So that's the main aim of the solution that Stability and Datto look to put in place is minimizing downtime. And hopefully that's been a good demonstration of how the technology can reach that aim. So just to flesh out a couple of things which we've discussed around RPO and RTO. The RPO is an acronym, obviously, that stands for Recovery Point Objective, and this really is how recent does your backup need to be? Do you need a copy of your data that's just from 5 minutes ago, or can you rely on an hourly backup? Some companies rely on a daily backup. It really depends on how much data loss you can tolerate. So that's what your recovery point objective would be, the backup that you are going to ultimately restore from. The recovery time objective happens after the disaster strikes. This is how quickly you can take your backup, take your RPO, and you can then use it to get to a point of business continuity where you're no longer at the stage of having an outage. So it's definitely worth going through a process of looking at what's at stake from a commercial point of view. How costly will downtime be to your particular business? We surveyed our partners and the end user businesses that they're supporting across Ireland, and found that €7,000 per hour is the average cost of downtime for a small and medium-sized business. And you can see as the number of employees increases in an organization, the amount of the cost associated rather with downtime per hour really does start to skyrocket. And you can model this by going through some sort of recovery time objective or recovery point objective calculator. We've got one on our website, and we're able to share out. You can really put in your recovery objectives around RPO and RTO. You can put in the amount of data that you're looking to protect, how long it takes to initiate your recovery process. This is with your existing solutions. So you saw with the Datto solution that I demonstrated a moment ago, it really just takes minutes to get back up and running, but sometimes it takes hours when you have other legacy solutions in place. And then let's see how often you currently back up those systems. What's the time between each backup? How many employees would be affected if critical systems failed? What's the hourly wage of those employees who you're going to be paying to essentially twiddle their thumbs if they can't actually use the computer systems? How much revenue are they generating per hour that's then going to be lost potentially if they cannot access systems to process orders, etc.? And what's the average hourly overhead of an employee? It doesn't matter if you don't know this exactly, you can estimate it or put the figures conservatively low if you wish. And what it will spit out at the end is just an estimated cost to your business of downtime. And then you can see the numbers that have been used to calculate here based on everything else that you put into the tool. And once you have that information to hand, you're able to really define what is an acceptable recovery point objective and an acceptable recovery time objective for your particular organization. So you can start to demand that from solutions that you have in place to protect your data. So hopefully that's been a useful rundown of a couple of things really. So the actual threats that are out there, particularly ransomware, a demonstration of not only how ransomware can affect a system, but how you can quickly recover from your latest backup. And then if that's a solution which you see value in for your particular business, you can start to look at what you would demand out of the system in terms of a recovery point objective and a recovery time objective as well. So thanks so much for your attention. And John, on the line, did we have any questions come in at all?
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions here. The first one was, can the ransomware piece that you're showing now, could that actually replace an antivirus?
We wouldn't see it as a replacement for antivirus. We do have a feature called ransomware detection, but that actually runs a scan on your backups rather than looking at the live system. So we just want to make sure that there isn't ransomware within the backup chain and that you're not recovering a point in time that has ransomware. In terms of protecting the live system, definitely that's something that I would encourage people to speak to stability about. What other solutions would be required for that? So it's not a replacement for antivirus. You would need antivirus running on the live system. See the Datto solution as the last line of defense. That's probably the easiest way to think about it. If your other multi-layered security solutions have failed and your data has been compromised, at that point you need to go to your backups.
Excellent, thank you. Actually, we have one more question, which is actually kind of important for an awful lot of businesses. They want to know if the solution is GDPR compliant.
So we often get asked, particularly in recent times as GDPR has been launched, if our solution is compliant from a GDPR perspective. It really is up to partners and end user businesses to determine that. We can certainly give you the facts. Stability has a lot of experience of Datto solutions, and we can obviously advise ourselves on the facts of things around where your data is held, what's the physical location for that data, what sort of encryption do we use in transit and at rest, and then it's really up to you to look at those facts and then determine whether it's going to work for your particular regulatory framework, whether it's GDPR or any other regulations or compliance that you face for your business and for your actual data that you're backing up. So I would say working with a vendor like Datto does help often with GDPR and other compliance conversations, because we can specify exactly kind of where the goalposts are and kind of what we are doing with the data that we're protecting.
Amazing. Listen, I think that's all from a question point of view. So I guess thank you very much for your time today. It was a great demonstration. I definitely think you can see the benefits of having business continuity in place rather than just having backup. So I want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank everybody who's after joining us on the line today, and thank you very much for your questions. And I think with that, we'll end the webinar. Thank you very much.
No problem at all. Thanks, John.
Bye now.